My parents ignored my bullying at school and blamed me for it, saying I provoked it. I moved in with my grandparents and cut contact. That was 4 months ago. Today they're begging me to come back. Look, I never thought I'd be the type to air my family drama on Reddit, but here we are. Sometimes you just need strangers on the internet to tell you you're not going crazy, you know? So grab your favorite snack because this story's got more twists than a bag of Twizzlers. It all started back in sophomore year at Lincoln High. I was just your average awkward 15-year-old trying to survive high school without dying of embarrassment. You know how it is, braces, hand-me-down Converse that were falling apart, and the social skills of a pet rock. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't exactly a target either. At least not until Jessica Morrison decided I was her personal entertainment. Jessica was one of those girls who peaked in high school. No cap. Blonde hair always perfectly straightened, daddy's credit card in her Coach wallet, and a crew of wannabes following her around like lost puppies. She drove a brand new Honda Civic that her parents bought her for her 16th birthday, while I was still riding the cheese wagon to school every morning. The bullying started small. Little comments about my thrift store clothes, purposely bumping into me in the hallways, that kind of petty stuff. But Jessica had this way of making everything sound like a joke, so when teachers overheard, they'd just tell us to work it out, or whatever. Classic adults, am I right? Things escalated pretty quick, though. One day, I'm sitting in the cafeteria eating my sad peanut butter sandwich when Jessica and her minions walk over. She accidentally spills her entire Starbucks Frappuccino all over my backpack and homework. My English essay that I'd spent 3 days working on was completely ruined. When I got upset, she just laughed and said I should have moved my stuff. That's when I made my first mistake. I went to my parents for help. Mom was folding laundry when I walked into the living room, tears still fresh on my cheeks. Dad was parked on his usual spot on the couch, beer in hand, watching SportsCenter like it was the most important thing in the world. I told them everything that had happened, expecting some kind of support or at least acknowledgement that what Jessica did was messed up. Instead, Mom just sighed and said, "Honey, are you sure you didn't do something to provoke her? Kids don't just pick on someone for no reason." Dad didn't even look away from the TV. Maybe if you tried harder to fit in, these things wouldn't happen. When I was your age, I handled my own problems. I stood there for a solid minute, waiting for the punchline or the just kidding that never came. They were serious. My own parents were blaming me for getting bullied. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. But I thought maybe they'd understand better if I gave them more details, so I kept trying. Over the next few weeks, every time something happened at school, I'd tell them about it. Jessica started a rumor that I had lice. She convinced half the sophomore class that I smelled bad. She even got her boyfriend to accidentally knock my books out of my hands every time he passed me in the hallway. Each time I brought it up, my parents' response got worse. Mom started saying things like, "Well, maybe you should try using different shampoo," or "Are you showering enough?" Dad's contribution was usually something about how kids these days are too soft and how I needed to toughen up. The breaking point came during junior year. Jessica had convinced her whole crew to make my life a living nightmare. They'd follow me around school making animal noises. They'd throw things at me during lunch. One time, Jessica's friend Madison accidentally pushed me down the stairs, and I ended up with a sprained ankle and bruises all over my arm. Update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and honestly, it's helping more than you know. Some of you are asking about the school's involvement. That's where things get even more frustrating. Should I explain what happened when I tried going to the administration? When I limped home that day with my ankle swollen like a balloon, I thought for sure my parents would finally take this seriously. I showed them the bruises, explained what happened, and begged them to call the school, or Madison's parents, or someone who could actually help. Mom looked at my injuries and said, "Are you sure you didn't just fall? You've always been clumsy." Dad's response was even better. "Stop being so dramatic. A few bruises never killed anyone. Maybe this will teach you to pay attention to where you're walking." I couldn't believe it. I was literally injured, and they were still finding ways to make it my fault. That's when something inside me just broke. I realized that my own parents cared more about avoiding confrontation than protecting their daughter. School wasn't any better. I finally worked up the courage to report everything to Vice Principal Johnson, thinking surely the adults there would take bullying seriously. Boy, was I wrong. Johnson called it a personality conflict and suggested we all sit down together to work through our differences. When I explained that these weren't differences but deliberate harassment, he basically told me that Jessica was a good student from a good family and maybe I was misinterpreting her intentions. That meeting was a joke. Jessica showed up with fake tears, apologizing for any misunderstandings, while her parents nodded along sympathetically. The whole time she was shooting me looks that clearly said she was going to make my life even worse for snitching, and guess what? She absolutely did. After that meeting, the bullying got creative. Jessica started using social media to torment me. She'd make fake accounts to send me nasty messages. She'd post unflattering photos of me that her friends took without permission. She even created a whole group chat dedicated to making fun of everything I did, said, or wore. The worst part was coming home every day to parents who acted like I was the problem. If I was upset, I was being too sensitive. If I fought back even a little, I was being aggressive and causing trouble. If I tried to ignore it, I wasn't standing up for myself. There was literally no way to win. One particularly bad day in March, Jessica and her crew cornered me in the bathroom and spent 10 minutes telling me how worthless I was, how no one would ever like me, and how I should just transfer schools because nobody wanted me there. I came home crying so hard I could barely breathe, and you know what my mom said? Maybe they have a point. Have you considered that you might be the common denominator in all these problems? That was it. I was done. That night, I called my grandparents. Grandma and Grandpa lived about 2 hours away in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and people actually looked out for each other. I'd always felt more comfortable there during summer visits than I ever did in my own house. I explained everything to Grandma through tears and snot and probably way too much detail. She listened to every word without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Pack your bags, sweetheart. Grandpa's driving over to get you tonight." I'd never heard more beautiful words in my life. When my parents realized I was serious about leaving, they suddenly had all kinds of opinions about the situation. Mom started crying about how I was breaking up the family. Dad got mad and said I was being manipulative and ungrateful. They both insisted that I was overreacting and that families work through problems together. But here's the thing, we weren't working through anything. They'd spent months dismissing my problems and making me feel like everything was my fault. Now that I was actually doing something about it, suddenly I was the bad guy for not wanting to stick around for more of the same treatment. Grandpa showed up at 11 p.m. in his old Ford pickup, and I've never been happier to see anyone in my life. He didn't say much to my parents, just helped me load my stuff and told them we'd be in touch. The ride to their house was mostly quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, you know? Like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath underwater. Update. The messages keep pouring in, and honestly, some of you are making me cry happy tears. A lot of people are asking about how things changed after I moved in with my grandparents. Let me tell you, it was like stepping into a completely different world. But first, should I tell you about the phone call that changed everything with Jessica? Living with Grandma and Grandpa was honestly the best thing that ever happened to me. Their house was this cozy little place with a front porch swing and a garden that Grandma was super proud of. Every morning, she'd make these incredible pancakes from scratch, and Grandpa would sit at the kitchen table reading the local paper and making commentary about everything he read. The first week was rough, because I was still processing everything that had happened. I'd wake up expecting to hear Mom yelling about something or Dad complaining about work, but instead there was just peaceful quiet and the smell of coffee brewing. It was almost too good to be true. Grandma enrolled me in the local high school, which was way smaller than Lincoln High, but felt like paradise compared to what I'd been dealing with. Everyone was friendly in that small-town way where people actually say hi to each other in the hallways. I wasn't instantly popular or anything, but nobody was actively trying to make my life miserable either, which felt like a massive upgrade. The best part was having adults who actually listened when I talked. If I had a bad day, Grandma would sit with me at the kitchen table and we'd talk through whatever was bothering me. If I was stressed about schoolwork, Grandpa would help me figure out a plan instead of telling me to just try harder. It was like discovering what a real family was supposed to feel like. My parents called every few days at first, but the conversations were always the same. They'd ask when I was coming home, I'd say I wasn't, and then they'd get frustrated and hang up. Mom would cry and guilt-trip me about missing family dinners. Dad would get angry and accuse me of being stubborn and dramatic. Neither of them ever acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, they'd handled things badly. Meanwhile, I was actually starting to feel like myself again. I joined the drama club at my new school and discovered I was pretty good at it. I made friends with this group of kids who were into photography and spent weekends exploring the countryside, taking pictures of random stuff. For the first time in years, I was excited about going to school instead of dreading it. But the real game changer came about 2 months after I moved in with my grandparents. I was sitting in my room doing homework when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Is this the girl who went to Lincoln High? I recognized the voice immediately. It was Sarah Chen, this quiet girl who'd been in a few of my classes sophomore year. We'd never been close friends, but she'd always seemed nice enough. Yeah, this is me. Sarah, how did you get my number? I asked around. Listen, I need to tell you something about Jessica Morrison. Are you sitting down? Turns out, after I left Lincoln High, Jessica had decided she needed a new target to keep herself entertained. She'd chosen Sarah, probably because Sarah was quiet and seemed like an easy mark. But Sarah was different from me. She had parents who took bullying seriously and weren't afraid to make noise about it. When Jessica started her usual routine of harassment and rumors, Sarah's parents immediately contacted the school administration, with detailed documentation of everything that was happening. They threatened legal action if the school didn't take immediate steps to address the bullying. They even hired a lawyer to write official letters and everything. The school suddenly took things very seriously when lawyers got involved. They launched a full investigation into Jessica's behavior, and guess what they found? A whole pattern of bullying that went back years. Turns out I wasn't her first victim, and Sarah wasn't going to be her last. Multiple students came forward with their own stories about Jessica's harassment. The administration found evidence of cyberbullying, verbal abuse, and even some physical intimidation. Jessica's social media accounts were full of screenshots that other students had saved, showing just how nasty she could be. The best part? The school discovered that several teachers and staff members had reported concerns about Jessica's behavior over the years, but somehow those reports had never been properly addressed. Vice Principal Johnson was in some serious hot water for his handling of multiple bullying cases, including mine. Jessica ended up getting expelled. Not suspended, not detention, but full-on kicked out of school. Her college prospects were ruined because no decent school wants to accept a student with an expulsion on their record for bullying. Her parents tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah told me that Jessica's whole crew kind of fell apart after that. Without their queen bee, they didn't know how to function. Some of them got in trouble for their own roles in various bullying incidents. Others just faded into the background, probably realizing that being mean wasn't actually a personality trait worth building your identity around. When I hung up the phone after talking to Sarah, I felt this incredible mix of relief and vindication. Everything I'd been telling my parents was true. Everything I'd experienced was real and documented and serious enough to get someone expelled from school. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't oversensitive, and I definitely wasn't making things up for attention. I called my parents that night to tell them what had happened. I thought maybe this would be the wake-up call they needed to realize how badly they'd handled everything. Mom's response: "Well, that's unfortunate for that girl, but you still could have handled things better." Dad said, "See, the problem worked itself out. You didn't need to run away to your grandparents." I couldn't believe it. Even with proof that I'd been the victim of serious bullying, they still couldn't admit they'd been wrong. They still couldn't apologize for not supporting me when I needed them most. That conversation made it crystal clear that moving in with my grandparents was the right decision. Update. Okay, everyone, this is where things get really interesting. A lot of you have been asking about what happened when my parents finally realized I was serious about staying with my grandparents. Well, today's the day they showed up unannounced, and let me tell you, it was better than any reality TV show. Should I tell you about the epic showdown that happened on Grandma's front porch? Life continued to improve over the next couple of months. My grades went up because I wasn't constantly stressed and distracted by bullying. I got the lead in the school's spring play, which was this huge confidence boost. I even started dating this sweet guy named Marcus, who was on the basketball team and treated me like I actually mattered. My grandparents were incredible throughout everything. They never once made me feel like I was a burden or that I was causing problems by living with them. Grandpa taught me how to change the oil in his truck and how to fix basic things around the house. Grandma showed me all her secret recipes and let me help plan the family garden for spring planting. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I felt valued and supported and genuinely loved. It was amazing how much better everything got when I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or defending myself against people who were supposed to care about me. My parents' phone calls became less frequent, but they never stopped trying to convince me to come home. The guilt trips got more creative. Mom would tell me how sad my little brother was without me there, even though he was 12 and mostly cared about video games and whether there were Pop-Tarts in the pantry. Dad would complain about how I was making things difficult for the whole family by being stubborn, but here's what they never did. They never once apologized for not believing me. They never acknowledged that maybe they'd made mistakes in how they handled the bullying situation. They never took responsibility for making me feel like I had to choose between my mental health and my family. Instead, they kept acting like I was the one who needed to make amends, like I was the one who had done something wrong by refusing to put up with their dismissive attitude and victim blaming. The breaking point came last week. I was sitting on the front porch with Grandma, helping her snap green beans for dinner, when a car pulled into the driveway. It was my parents, and they looked like they meant business. Mom jumped out of the passenger seat before Dad even turned off the engine. She was wearing her "I want to speak to the manager" outfit. You know, the one, crisp white blouse and her fancy purse clutched like a weapon. Dad followed behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. "We need to talk," Mom announced, not even bothering with hello or how are you or any basic politeness. Grandma stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, hello to you too. I wasn't expecting visitors today." "We're here for our daughter," Dad said, like I was some kind of stolen property they were retrieving. "I'm right here," I said, staying seated on the porch swing. "You could try talking to me instead of about me." That's when Mom launched into this whole speech about how I'd been away long enough, and it was time to come home and stop being ridiculous. She talked about family loyalty and forgiveness and how everyone makes mistakes. She said they missed me and wanted me back where I belonged. But here's the thing. She said all of this without once acknowledging what they'd done wrong. It was all about what I needed to do differently, how I needed to be more understanding, how I needed to come home and put this whole thing behind us. Dad's contribution was even better. He said I was being manipulative by staying away and that I was hurting my little brother by abandoning the family. He said Grandma and Grandpa were enabling my bad behavior by letting me stay with them. I let them talk for about 10 minutes, and then I stood up. "Are you done?" "Excuse me?" Mom said, looking shocked that I had the audacity to interrupt her guilt trip. "I asked if you were done, because I've listened to everything you had to say and I noticed something missing from your whole speech." "What's that supposed to mean?" Dad asked. "You never apologized, not once. You came here to demand that I come home, but you never acknowledged that maybe you handled things badly. You never said you were sorry for not believing me when I told you I was being bullied. You never took responsibility for making me feel like everything was my fault." Mom started to say something, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. For months, I came to you guys begging for help. I was crying, I was hurt, I was desperate for my own parents to support me, and instead of helping me, you blamed me. You made me feel like I deserved to be treated badly. You taught me that my feelings didn't matter and that I couldn't count on you when things got tough. That's not what we were trying to do, Mom protested, but that's what you did. Impact matters more than intention, and the impact of your actions was that your daughter felt so unsupported and unwanted that she had to move in with her grandparents to feel safe and valued. Dad was getting red in the face, which usually meant he was about to lose his temper. We provided for you. We gave you a home and food and everything you needed. Everything except emotional support when I needed it most, I shot back. You gave me the basics, but you failed at the most important part of being parents, making your child feel loved and protected. That's when Grandpa appeared on the porch. He'd been inside during the whole confrontation, but I guess he figured it was time to weigh in. I think you folks need to leave now. This is none of your business, Dad said, squaring up like he was ready for a fight. Actually, it became my business the night you called me crying because your granddaughter felt so unwanted in her own home that she begged me to come get her, Grandpa said calmly. It became my business when I watched a beautiful, smart, funny girl rebuild her confidence and remember her worth after you spent months tearing her down. Mom started crying then, which was her usual tactic when things weren't going her way. She's our daughter. We love her. Then prove it, Grandma said, speaking up for the first time since the confrontation started. Love isn't just saying the words. Love is showing up when someone needs you. Love is believing your child when they tell you they're hurting. Love is putting their well-being above your own comfort. We want our family back together, Mom sobbed. Then earn it, I said. Go to therapy. Figure out why you were so quick to blame me instead of protecting me. Learn how to apologize properly and take responsibility for the damage you caused. Show me that you understand what went wrong and that you're committed to doing better. We're not going to therapy just because our teenager is having a dramatic phase, Dad said. And there it was. Even faced with losing their daughter, they still couldn't admit they'd made mistakes. They still saw this as my problem, my overreaction, my drama. Then I guess this conversation is over, I said. I love you guys, but I love myself too much to go back to a situation where I'm constantly made to feel like I'm the problem. They left after that, but not before Dad made some comment about how I'd come crawling back when I realized how good I had it at home. Mom just kept crying and saying she didn't understand how things had gotten so bad. But here's the thing, I do understand. Things got bad because they chose to prioritize their own comfort over their daughter's well-being. They chose to believe that I was the problem because that was easier than confronting the fact that their child was being tormented and they weren't doing anything to stop it. After they left, I sat back down on the porch swing next to Grandma. She put her arm around me and we just sat there for a while, listening to the birds and watching the sunset behind the trees. You did good, sweetheart, she said finally. It doesn't feel good. It feels sad. Sometimes doing the right thing feels sad, but you stood up for yourself and set boundaries. That's something to be proud of. She was right. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to my parents and demanded to be treated with respect. I'd refused to accept blame for things that weren't my fault. I'd chosen my own well-being over keeping the peace. It's been a few days since the confrontation, and I keep thinking about everything that's happened. A year ago, I was miserable, isolated, and convinced that I was somehow defective because bad things kept happening to me. Today, I'm thriving in a loving environment with people who support me and believe in me. The bullying situation at my old school got resolved not because my parents finally decided to help, but because other parents and students refused to accept that behavior. My emotional well-being improved not because my family learned how to be supportive, but because I found people who already knew how to love someone properly. I'm not saying I'll never have a relationship with my parents again. People can change, and maybe someday they'll do the work necessary to earn back my trust. But I'm not holding my breath, and I'm definitely not sacrificing my happiness while I wait for them to figure it out. Right now, I'm focused on finishing high school, applying to colleges, and building the kind of life I want to live. I'm surrounded by people who think I'm worth protecting and supporting. I'm in an environment where my feelings matter and my experiences are validated. Jessica's expulsion was just the cherry on top of everything else. Justice served by people who actually cared enough to document evidence and hold her accountable for her actions. Meanwhile, my parents are still trying to convince me that I overreacted to months of harassment and abuse. The contrast couldn't be clearer. I've learned that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Sometimes loving yourself means walking away from people who consistently make you feel worthless, even if those people gave birth to you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that makes you question your own reality. My grandparents saved my life in more ways than one. They showed me what it feels like to be genuinely valued and supported. They proved that my experiences were real and valid and worth taking seriously. They gave me the space and safety I needed to remember who I was underneath all the damage that had been done. As for my parents, well, they're still calling every few days, still trying to convince me to come home, still refusing to acknowledge their role in everything that happened. But I'm not the same scared, desperate girl who used to beg them for help while they told me I was the problem. I'm stronger now. I know my worth. I know what real love and support look like. And I know that I deserve better than people who make me feel like I have to earn their basic decency and care. So yeah, that's my story. The girl who got bullied, blamed by her parents, and found her real family with her grandparents. The girl who learned that sometimes walking away is the healthiest thing you can do, even when it breaks your heart. Life's pretty good now. I'm happy, I'm safe, and I'm surrounded by people who actually give a damn about my well-being. Jessica's dealing with the consequences of her actions. My parents are dealing with the consequences of theirs, and I'm just here living my best life with the family that chose to love me properly. Sometimes the best revenge is simply thriving in spite of the people who tried to break you down. Sometimes the best apology you can give yourself is refusing to accept treatment that makes you feel worthless. I'm not perfect, and my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.